People are piling in. All right, it is 9 o'clock a.m. on Saturday morning at our 32nd annual conference. And I am delighted to be here. I'm Pat O'Brien, the Executive Director of the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York. I always like to start out by acknowledging our sponsors. New York State's Office of Children and Family Services, OCFS, sponsored our wonderful keynotes, and they also sponsored many foster parents being able to attend this conference under scholarship. So I thank you, OCFS. Also want to acknowledge the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption and its signature program, the Wendy's Wonderful Kids program. And they are actually hosting our evening event tonight, and I hope everybody makes that event as well. In addition, I want to acknowledge All Together Now, JCCA, the Yoga Centers, the Oil Dry Corporation of America, Kathy Urbana and Tim Stoner, and Liz Smith Mayo, and thank you for your sponsorships. And and we have many of our amazing staff attending this morning. I just want to acknowledge some of our advisory council members who I caught. And if I didn't catch your name now, I'll come after, but I want to thank Lisa Maynard for getting us started this morning. She's an advisory council member. Antoinette Sumner Cotman, advisory council member. Welcome Karen Kelly and Shemin Vizzi. And we'll probably have more joining us throughout the day, but I just wanted to acknowledge you guys. All right. Want to get into the introduction of our speakers this morning. I heard this dynamic duo you are about to hear at a conference that actually the coalition hosted on this very platform one Saturday morning back in October. I joined the presentation after the introduction, and I kept saying to myself, these clinicians really know what they're talking about. You would think they were adoptive parents. At the time, I didn't know they were. So during the entire presentation, I kept saying to myself, wow, they really get this stuff. So I was delighted to learn that in addition to being the highly skilled clinicians that they are, they also have the lived experience of being adoptive parents. So I just wanted to share that with you because you're in for a great treat this morning. Partners in life, Nikki and Torrey Carroll believe in the redemptive power of relationships. They have championed the cause for more than a decade by walking alongside marriages and families as they heal, as they grow. As adoptive parents and psychotherapists, they understand, respect both the pressures involved in building a family, coupled with unique gifts and learning experiences that the adoption dynamic brings. The Carrolls are frequent speakers at conferences and have extended experience collaborating with non-for-profit organizations, agencies, communities, community ambassadors to develop programming that revitalizes and enriches individual and family systems. Their clinical training and specializations include marriage, family therapy, crisis intervention, trauma, and adoption-sensitive therapy. Experience extends to working with individuals of all ages who are connected to the child welfare system, such as adoptees, first families, adoptive families, and caregivers. There are so many more wonderful things in their biography that I'm not going to read for you right now, but please check out their bio on our website. Let me just end with sharing that the Carrolls have been married for 20 years. Their journey has been filled with rich experiences that have varied from softly spoken messages to loud and obnoxious life lessons on how to manage and maintain a healthy marriage. The Carrolls reside in the suburb of Dallas and call it an honor to be the parents of two wonder-filled children. As husband, wife, and parents of two, they bring extensive life experience and a heart for supporting and serving families in the foster care and adoption community. Conference participants, I am delighted to present to you Torrey and Nikki Carroll. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you all so much. Pat, I like in Pat and the whole Adoption and Foster Family Coalition of New York, I'd say thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you for the trust that you've extended to us this morning. We do not take it lightly. And we know that in your 46 years of since inception and the 32nd annual conference that you've probably seen a lot. But we appreciate the vote of confidence, the opportunity to talk about something that we cherish and value so dearly as lived experience, as professional experience, and just normal life for us. We like to say that adoption is a lifelong journey for everyone. And being with others of a shared experience is powerful. I think Brene Brown always talks about it best in terms of that we belong nowhere at the same time we belong everywhere. Your adoption theme this year, what lies beneath? You know, I thought that was so fascinating, right? And being a big fan of Eckhart Tolle, and seeing and enjoying his work. And I guess, I don't know, it's called A Book Full of Sundays, I guess Oprah's book. Having read it and listened to the audiobook as well, and being a big fan of his after that, I thought this theme was outstanding and perfect. Right. I'll say that we are excited again. Glad to see all the warm faces. Thank you again, Pat, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you for honing in on the things that mattered most important to us. Absolutely. Which are, it's not the education, it's not the clinical perspective, it's the fact that we're caregivers, right? And we believe that relationships, we're healed in relationships and we're harmed in relationships. But we have an opportunity this morning that we want to embrace. My name is Torrey Carroll.
Yes, and I'm Nikki Carroll. And before we go too much further, I just want, if everyone can just give me a thumbs up, or Torrey or Pat, can you see our presentation deck? Perfect. Thank you. That makes me happy. So yes, I'm Nikki Carroll, and I just want to echo Torrey. Thank you so much for having us here. I will just say our hope today. We really want to offer guidance for parents and professionals on how to create and sustain developmentally appropriate conversations about race, right? So when we think about the context of prejudice, stereotypes, and all the various intersections that transracial adoption brings, we really just want to hang out in this space, because oftentimes when we're talking about race, people have a tendency sometimes to become defensive. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about why that is, but we want to encourage everyone to challenge you, to encourage you to practice active listening as we have a dialogue. We also want to challenge you to use some of those same techniques that we use when we're parenting from that connected perspective, right? So there's that empathy, the being receptive, the compassion, and staying self-regulated. Lisa, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I needed that. So I was just so amazed with the beauty that you shepherded us through when it comes to mindfulness. Our style, one of the things I will say, our style, we are not monologue people. If we were sitting knee to knee with you or in the room, I mean, we're going to be asking you to talk back. So we're going to do this as best as we can virtually. So there will be some times we're going to ask you in the comment box just to type and talk back to us. So we want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear what you're thinking as we dialogue on this together. We'll ask you to hold any questions at the end. We have a lot to cover, but at the same time, we're going to be very mindful of our time, and we're going to try to save some time at the end. But if not, we'll be hanging around in the space on the platform, and you can connect with us as you need to. So we'd love, first and foremost, just to get a pulse. Who's here today? Adoptive parents, type it in. Foster parents, social workers, clinicians, professionals, transracial caregivers, those who love all of these people that I just mentioned. Please type that in and let us know who's here today. And I, normally Lisa has, she has stole my mojo. We normally, because this is a topic that is very, it's difficult sometimes, and we know it's heavy and gets layered and messy. We usually do some mindfulness, but Lisa has covered it. I will just say, we know you could have been any place else. We are so thrilled that you're here with us. One more time, just take a minute, feel your body, find your breath. And let's do this. We're so happy that you're here. So we love movies, we love video clips. You will see that. And so the first thing we're going to start out with is a video clip, and Torrey's going to set the stage for this.
Yes, thank you so much. So as Nikki reminded you today is going to be an interactive experience. So we hope we invite you to participate through the chat box. There are times where we're going to ask you to take very specific action along the course of our journey today. We want you to relax, get back, get ready. We're going to set the tone today by watching a scene one of my favorite scenes from a movie. I guess it probably has to go in the top 10, in terms of global experiences, but it's Avatar. I don't know if anybody remembers the movie Avatar, and the Na'vi tribe and humans and how they met, how they interacted on the Navian planet. But we're going to go right straight into this movie clip. It's brief. It's about a minute, 60, 70 seconds. And it really sets the tone today for what we want to accomplish. What lies beneath? That's the topic we're exploring today. I love this movie. It parallels so many things. I saw somebody mention that Stacy, I believe that it was her favorite movie because it had such a spiritual message in it. Stacy, I agree with you. I often see things, and we tend as trending toward the psychoanalytic school of thought. We tend to look that way as well. So what did you all see? Mm-hmm. Did you see two beings that were finally seeing each other? Oftentimes our children come to us appearing as unknown. We're granted the opportunity to see them for who they are. We get the chance to participate with them as they answer the question around their significance as it relates to their identity. Today, we will invite some, remind others, and challenge us all to remember that the journey our children take across the lifespan, we get to participate in a wonderful journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things is no one told us that this was going to be easy. There are so many detours along the way. So when we think about transracial adoption, there's detours, there's intersections along the way. And what we get to do as adopted parents is shepherd that. And guess what? It's going to be layered. It's going to be messy sometimes. It's going to bring up a lot in us. And sometimes we will feel inadequate, right? But the good news is that with intentionality, we can do this. We can grow together. So that's one of the things we want to do is talk about how do we grow together. So first and foremost, we will start by saying,
Sawubona. That is a Zulu word. A Zulu word. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. If you have, just kind of nod along. If you haven't, we're going to introduce it to you. Sawubona. It literally means I see you. You are important to me. I value you, Annette, Shameen, Marlene. I see you. It's a way to make others and make the other people visible and to accept them as they are with virtues, nuances, and flaws. Sawubona symbolizes the importance of directing our attention to another person. It exists to remind us to accept others without prejudice and to leave our judgment and grudges behind. The term reminds us to be aware of other people's needs and to give importance to individuals in a group. It also helps us think about integrating into our communities and valuing it. Sawubona, that's the way we greet you today.
And then the next slide says, and there, I don't know if y'all see, there's little bitty marks on here, so I'm not sure where those came from, but we're going to keep moving through this. But the next slide says Sakona, and this is the response. Sakona, which means I am here, I'm here. And this exchange is so important, for it denotes because you see me, then I am here. I do not even exist until you see me. And when you see me, you bring me into existence. So we would like to lay this presentation on the foundational words from the Zulu tribe, Sawubona and Sakona. Sakona and Sawubona.
Nikki, before you go to the next location, I like to pause here and say this. We invite all of you over the course of today, our time together, we're going to have about a few minutes to speak with you. We invite you to participate every time you see the words see you or Sakona. We want you to say it to yourselves. I see you. All right. If you want to say it out loud or say it in the chat box, we invite you to type it, I see you. This is so important. Nikki, I'll give it back to you.
Yes. So our roadmap. Here's where we're going today. Our roadmap is, and I do apologize. I'm not sure if you see little lines on the screen, but I apologize. Sometimes when we do slides, if someone is on there, sometimes it actually kind of comes through. So I'm not sure if you see a few little swipes through there, it's green, but we're going to keep pressing through. So here's where we're going today. We're going to cover off on so many different intersections. First of all, the intersections of race, trauma, and adoption, and the responsibilities that uniquely fall to transracial adopted parents and how to meet them with confidence and sensitivity. We're also going to dissect and unpack some beliefs and biases. We all come to the table with bias. We're going to talk about what is the difference between intent and impact. And we're going to discover how to identify and navigate blind spots together. It's so important because when we identify and navigate blind spots, that also helps us to understand how do we address race, culture, identity really early on. When we address it early on, it becomes absolutely vital for us to be really intentional about what that looks like. We want to share tools to empower children and adults to become racially aware and connected. We also will touch on how do we talk about race? How do we acknowledge that race matters? What are some of the terms that we should be sensitive to? So there is terminology and language and jargon that we should know. And then we'll also share just firsthand, growth areas as it relates to families that are built across racial bounds. So we're just here to give some guidance. We're going to chat, we're going to talk. And we just want to thank you so much for being brave enough to enter into this dialogue with us. We know that in this space, there's vulnerability sometimes. It brings up things in us. And so we just want you to be honest, and we'll be honest, and then we will just grow together. And it does not have to be all or nothing. We want to remind everyone, we're not looking for all or nothing. We are looking for those baby steps along the way. And that's what gets us to the big goal and the big picture here. So a little bit about who we are.
A little bit about who we are.
Yes.
We are psychotherapists. We're co-founders of the TNC Psychotherapy Group, and we own a separate company called Coachable Works, right? It's Coachable Works because Coachable works. We practice the healing arts of counseling and training and coaching. We work with individuals, couples, families, children. Our specific niche was formed by adoption across, and is for all members of the adoptive triad.
We are partners in life. Pat already talked about that. So we're partners in life and work. The beautiful thing about our story is that we get it. We get it. We have lived this. Our family is built through adoption. And here's our family. Here's our lovely kiddos. We have a beautiful son, a beautiful daughter, and Torrey loves to tell the story about how we met. Torrey, do you want to share just a little bit? So
Sure.
we like to make this a little personal so you know who you're hanging out with for the next 90 minutes. So do share a little bit about our story because it is unique.
Sure. About 21 years ago, I met Nikki. I met Nikki on March 29th. I proposed to Nikki on April 12th. I married Nikki on September 30th, all in the same year. All right. So, there's an old question about, does love at first sight exist? Does it happen? I would say yes. I absolutely knew deep down in my heart that she was the person that my destiny was tied to, and that I couldn't, everything else that I could dream and imagine, I saw Nikki walking along beside me as my life partner. And I didn't want to waste any time I knew I could get to learn her over our journey together. And I knew she was the one. All right. So we navigated our first, I'll tell you, we spent about 20 years in corporate America before transitioning into psychotherapy. Yes. We navigated our first 13 years together in corporate America in respective careers, thriving before we even thought about family. And our family was built about 8.5 years ago. It was formed through adoption. Our children at the time were 3 and 4. And it was a wonderful season of transition and growth and stretching. You can see this. I don't know if you can. I don't know. It's probably difficult to see this, but our children are biracial. They don't look like us. All right. But we choose to honor every stitch of who they are culturally. We know this may be like a few of you sitting in the audience today or sitting at your chairs. We know what it's like. We're all in this together. We know it takes intentional practice and space. Transracially adopted children and their families face a range of challenges, and in the manner in which parents handle them can facilitate or hinder a child's development.
Yes, and I don't know if anyone can sit with us in that, but there's often when your kiddos don't quite look like you, especially if you are of a different ethnicity, there's often curiosity when it comes to those things that appear different to others. Transracial families often get asked questions like, is that your mom? Are those your parents? Is that your brother or sister? People are trying to figure it out. And we have to provide a safe space really for our children. And we also have to provide a safe space for us to be able to have some comments that are already prepared for those awkward questions. And not being healthy enough, I think sometimes, and knowing our own stuff and being educated enough on our own ways that we show up, sometimes those conversations can do harm if we're not really prepared on how to navigate those. So as parents, if we want to be effective, we can separate or tease out the concept of race or adoption very, very intentionally to our family systems. So if we do this, we can have an experience that is a win and it shepherds us into a new space, or we can miss opportunities. And missing being there for them in regards to teaching them how to manage their emotions is very complex. And so that's why we're going to talk about the intersections and what lies beneath all of the intersections, those things that we're going to talk about today. So let's go into the intersections and start talking about it.
How our minds work, right? As psychotherapists, practicing psychotherapists, we often speak about the perspective from the psychoanalytic school of thought, which is concerned, I think the most popular image from that piece of data and that modal of information is the iceberg. The iceberg speaks about what we see above the surface, but we also know that what we see above the surface is only a fraction of what it takes below the surface to hold it up. So this year's theme is so appropriate as we look at intent versus impact and what lies beneath. The iceberg helps us to imagine and demonstrate hidden narratives that lie below the surface, and we'll examine those today. And in the course of our discussion, we hope that you take personal inventory. We're going to do some light work about perception here shortly. We're going to go in our first exercise. We want you to participate. We want you to think to yourself as we show you the next few slides. And we're going to ask a question, okay? We don't want you to deal in I don't want to bias your answers or skew any perspective, but I want you to come very transparent. And we want you to give us a guess. Safe or unsafe, right? You can put it in the chat box. We're going to show you a picture. We want you to put your answer in the chat box, or you can think or write it down to yourself. Safe or unsafe?
Unsafe. So we're just going to blaze through a few pictures, and we're just going to say safe or unsafe when you just look at the face, when you look at the people. safe or unsafe? Okay. All right.
Okay. Now, let's learn a little bit more about these individuals, and we want you to consider some of your perspectives as we tell you who you are, tell you who they are, and what they represent. The first person that we showed you.
Okay, so we said safe or unsafe. Let's learn more. So the first person that we showed you, her name was Jennifer Walsh. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with her, but she was a formal special education teacher who was indicted for having a sexual relationship with a female 17-year-old student in a small town in Ohio. Okay, safe or unsafe?
All right.
Think to yourself.
Okay. The next person. This is Mr. Tristan Walker. Being as you guys are New Yorkers, you may have recognized his face. He's the founder and CEO of Walker & Company Brands. As a man of color, he couldn't find a razor that he liked. So as a young student out of Brooklyn, I believe, he invented one. He created his own. He ended up selling his company, or now I can tell you that he's a multimillionaire. He's a millennial. I think he's about 33, 34 years old. He's highly respected in Silicon Valley, but he is a New Yorker. I think Procter & Gamble bought his company December 2018 for a multi-billion-dollar offering, for which he remained on as part of the board and CEO.
Okay. The next person, his name is Tony McAleer. Safe or unsafe? He's a former white supremacist. He actually used to do a lot of recruiting for the Nazi nation, but now he's the executive director of Life After Hate. So he had this shift, a turnaround in life, and he really now goes out to tell a story about how he was literally steeped in hate, but he is now on a crusade to help other people know that there can be some transition and some intentional work about shifting perspectives.
Safe or unsafe? This gentleman is Idris Sandhu. He is 23 years old. He is the tech genius behind Uber, Instagram, and Snapchat. He's the algorithm whisperer. He's the coding genius that writes all the algorithms to get some of how the software works, some of the functionality. They often go to him to solve problems that have not been solved before.
Yeah.
He's 23 years old.
This next person, Jason Kessler. I'm not sure if you remember this infamous scene. It was all over the media, all over the news. He was one of the people among a group of white nationalists who protested in Charlottesville several years ago. And he's standing right next to the organizer, and that's Jason Kessler. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with that. In his white shirt and khakis, that was the uniform that they went to protest in Charlottesville.
So in order to pass this perception test we just gave you, you can only miss one question. If you miss more than one, there is work to do. The reality is that we bring all our biases to the table every single day. And when we make a choice to parent children of different ethnicities, it is our job to deconstruct those biases. Let's continue to explore how inappropriate imagery shows up all around us.
Yeah, and I love this quote. Stereotypes, they're formed and reinforced in countless rooms we may not even be aware of. So now we're going to kind of take us deeper. So when we're thinking about parenting or caregiving, or even when we're professionals trying to walk alongside individuals, thinking about all the different types of stereotypes that we may not be aware of just because of just privilege. So one of the things we want to talk about, I love to share this ad. So when we think about how stereotypes formulate in advertisements, media advertisements, Dove took a lot of heat for this ad and several others that came afterwards due to the tenor and insensitivity of the ad. After it originally ran, there was an outpouring of feedback about it being offensive to people of color, and particularly women of color. It was a so bad showing that a Black woman turning into a white woman depicts more so that she's clean, right? So as you see the brown skin coming off, When you wash with Dove, the perception is you become white, which is indicative of clean. Right? So advertising campaigns in a nutshell, it portrayed dark skin as dirty. You use our product, you emerge lighter, which is the optimal endpoint after becoming more clean. Perhaps if you were not a person of color, this might have passed right by you. But for a lot of women that were women of color, it was really something that kind of touched to the root of, wow, this is a little bit offensive. So we see some of these stereotypes coming up in advertisements. We also see it in education. So if you look at this depiction, we see subliminally, there's a message here. I'm not sure if you catch it. I'll let you look at it for a second. Okay. So what we see here is that Caucasian children, so we see the Caucasian children happy and proud. But then on the flip side, we see the children of color sad and angry. Right? Did y'all catch that one? On the next slide, we see in the media. So we talked about education, advertisement, now media, on the news, right? Newspaper. We're reading this headline, 19-year-old arrested Tuesday homicide. That's in the small little column, doesn't have a lot of real estate over there. See a small picture of the suspect. And we're not here to argue right or wrong as far as what happened. We're just showing you how sometimes it's portrayed in the media. So we see a small real estate in the paper, but then the bigger real estate is given for the headline about a burglary suspect. Right? And you see the picture of the African-American male, a lot bigger real estate in our newspaper. So these are subliminal messages that are often portrayed in our society as a norm. Sometimes we're walking through and we don't even understand. So that's why we always put this in our presentation, because it's just a gentle nod to some of the things that go on that we're not even aware of. And so stereotypes, going back to that quote, stereotypes are formed and reinforced in spaces that some of us may not even be aware of. This is why we really love, so we're going to share a lot of resources with you today. Why we love the project implicit assessment. We really want to call your attention to this because it's a great assessment for us to understand our own bias. Like, what do we come to the table with? Because as psychotherapists, we know that our narratives and our own personal story, our childhood, our unfinished business, we bring all of that to the table in the here and the now. So yes, we're going to have some bias, even if we are great people. So when we talk about the social racial norms of America, we each come to that table with our own experiences, right? So what we invite you to do, just take a little moment to jot down this link. We'll also put it in the chat a little bit later on when we're hanging out with you in the portal. But we invite you to personally continue to do work in this area, understanding your bias. The implicit association test, it's from Harvard. It's really a modern method on assessing race and attitude. That is all it is. So what we'd like you to do is either Google Harvard implicit association test. The link will pop up, or they'll send the link to you once you put your email in. And then there's just a form of questions, and you just answer them, and then they will give you your results. And I think it's amazing that there is an assessment out here that helps us know, okay, where is there some room for growth, right? Where is there some stretching opportunity? Another thing we want to share as we go into talking about race, culture, and identity, we want to lay the foundation. Okay, how do we explore the topic of racial identity, and how do we deconstruct it? And that's what we're going to do here a bit more. So we're going to start with unpacking some of the myths. Myths. We often hear them in our practice when we're working with family systems. There's things that we just know to be true just because we thought that this is how it was going to be. And so we would be remiss if we didn't just hang out for a moment in the space of some of the myths that we see pop up. And you may have even heard some of these within your own family, amongst friends, amongst church members, if you're a person of faith. But the truth be told, there are things that we have to really think through ourselves.
Intent versus impact.
So before we get to the myths, we're going to lay the foundation.
Yeah,
lay the foundation.
Absolutely. So as we talk about what lies beneath, as we take a journey, I think, and let's tie this up.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last couple of days, you've been hearing about brain health, about co-regulation, dysregulation, and regulation, and the stages, the parasympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, and how they operate, and how one, once you flip your lid, so to speak, you go into fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, and you move out of the parasympathetic to sympathetic, and how we move back and forth as human beings. Today, we are connecting the mind and the heart. So we're going to invite you from where you've been dealing in the last couple of days in the mind. We're going to invite you down into the heart now. And we're going to ask you to go back and forth up the ladder into the brain and down the ladder into the heart. And we're going to ask that the ladder remain unobstructed as we continue our discussion. Our exploration of intent versus impact is centered around intentions. And as every caregiver on this call or on this at this conference will say, we naturally default to wanting the best opportunities and experiences to be available to our children. Can you raise your hand if that's you? Meaning you want your children or your loved ones to have the best opportunities and experiences. Yeah. Okay, it's not a trick question. It's all of us. Most of us can say that our intentions toward our children or our children within the communities are overwhelmingly positive. Mm-hmm. However, sometimes if our intentions aren't correlated to the impact felt by our actions, then our well-meaning actions can inadvertently cause trauma to our children. We want to invite you to take inventory as we go along today about exploring what lies beneath. Take inventory of intent versus impact through the next phases of our journey.
Yeah, so when we think about the myths, right? The myths that we hear often, intent versus impact. Think about this, right? So some of the myths that we hear, and Torrey, do you want me to, I'll take this first slide. Some of the myths that we hear all the time, the emotional issues of adopted or foster children in transracial placements, oh, they're no different from children in same-race adoption or foster care. We hear that a lot. We hear developing a racial or cultural identity is not necessary to function as a member of a family or society. They are a part of our family. We brought them in. We're going to love them as our own. We also hear the foster adoptive family can be all things to the child, all things. The child's loss of racial origin and sources of racial identity can be replaced by that of their foster family or adoptive family with lots of love. We also hear you're only fostering or adopting a child. You're not fostering or adopting their race. You know, we're not fostering or adopting their cultural heritage. We hear that a lot as well.
Anybody can foster or adopt transracially or transculturally. No special resources, capabilities, or even skills or knowledge are necessary to parent transracially, transculturally. That's a myth. Love is enough. The only thing a transracially adopted or foster child needs is a loving, caring home. That's a myth as well. There are not sufficient numbers of same-race homes for African-American children. That's a myth. Children in transracial homes should be raised as if they are the same race and culture of the adoptive or foster family. The child should adapt to the family, not the family to the child. Shared racial identity and culture are necessary for family attachment and bonding. That is a myth. We have to ask ourselves about these myths, what lies beneath. The reality is, if we use our privilege to protect our children instead of prepare them, then we inadvertently may traumatize them by ill preparing them for the world that we live in. What lies beneath this intersection? The intersection of our intent, well-meaning, and our impacts. Is the need for identity of our children on many levels. There's a universal level, there's the individual level, and there's the genetic level for identity. Without identity, then we belong nowhere. With a strong identity, we can belong anywhere.
And just a moment, raise your virtual hand if you've heard any of those myths that we've talked about. If you've heard them and this is a safe place, we're learning, we're growing together. If you've heard that, or even thought that yourselves, right? It's so important for us to be very in tune to that. And thank you so much, Torrey, for talking about the intent versus impact, because I do believe that most of the times we go in with great intent, but the impact can be different if we really hold on to some of these myths. Great quote coming up here, Torrey. I know this is a quote that you really are fond of.
Yeah, I just wanted to sit for a minute, give everybody a chance to take a look at it. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, evil is done not so much by evil people, but by good people who do not know themselves and who do not probe deeply. One
Hmm.
of my favorite writers, Reinhold Niebuhr, right? Some of you may be familiar with him, some of you may not. But this is one of his quotes that really speak to good, intent, the intent of good intentions and the impact of our actions.
Yeah. So remember what you're supposed to do, see me. So
This
when
is our first chance for see me, right? Remember we said, whenever you see the slide, see me, your response is, I see you. Or if you feel bold and brave, you can say Sakona, right? It does not mean anything but because you see me, I am here.
and when we hold on to those myths, guess what? Our children aren't always seen. So now we're going to move into why do we need to address cultural identity? And the best way to lay the foundation here is just to begin to unpack some of the questions. I believe, and Torrey believes, that it's best shown by the following video. We love this video. You may have seen this video before. It's the Clark doll test, but it really lays the foundation, and we're going to unpack and process this afterwards, but we want to just show you why it is important to talk about race. I don't know why those are there.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with Black children. He asked them to choose between a Black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with? That one? I'd like to play with this. And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll? She's white. And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you give, and why does that look bad? Because it's black. And why do you think that's a nice doll? Because she's white. And can you give me the doll that looks like you? 15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll.
Yeah. So this is where it starts. This is where it starts. This video shows us, I think, in a really, I have seen this video on so many occasions. We've done this kind of talk, and every time I see it, it just brings up something in me. I will just share that. Because you see towards the end, there's that conflict, right? She's trying to, the little sweet baby, she's trying to reconcile, well, this is bad, but then this looks like me. And so this is where it starts. This video shows us in a powerful way that young children are not immune to racial stereotyping. We want to be real mindful because developmentally, there is destructive self-talk that starts at a very young age. And so what we see here is it's a playing out of internalized racism. And so this is a true term. This is a term we want to know, internalized racism. So I say this because guess what? These kiddos are probably being raised by same race parents, right? So we're not even thinking about parents that don't even look like them. And even in that, there's still this internal, like, this is good and this is bad, but this is what I look like, this is me. So identity formation, it starts so very early. If you're from a minority group, how identity formation occurs is much different from children of the dominant group, where everyone looks the same, right? So children are aware of who's in power at a very early age, and they're observing who's in control. And remember, we just talked about all the things that they see through media, sometimes through advertisement, through just in general stereotypes. Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark, if you're not familiar with that, please go and study their work. Their work was so instrumental in just the civil rights area, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. So they were so instrumental, and they worked with Black children to see the extent to which their color, their sense of their own race and status influenced their judgment about themselves and their self-esteem. So this is why it's so important, especially when we're parenting children of a different ethnicity, why it's so important, one, to know a little bit of history and a little bit about their culture and know what comes up when it comes to esteem and worth and value. A lot of this is subliminal. And so we have parents that will ask us, well, when is it the time to talk? We say at the very early stages, developmentally appropriate. And we'll tell you how to do that, but we don't want to wait. We want to start having some really intentional conversations very soon in the lifespan.
Robin, that's a great question. Guys, we had a question about whether the data was valid that we observed from the children, right? Whether or not the response would be different if the presenter was of the same ethnicity, or ethnicity plays a part in the polling and obtaining the data. It well may play a part in it. However, the results, even in those cases, Robin, would ultimately show that there is a bias that our kids pick up. They pick it up unconsciously through our history books. They pick it up unconsciously through the television shows, the cartoons, through coloring books, through the visits to the grocery store, through talking about inventors. They pick it up every single way. And if we were to give them this test in the absence of a real person, but through a mirror where we ask them these questions through a microphone, I think the data would be correlated to about the same results. But that is an interesting question. I think that maybe, we could investigate sometime. I don't know how many researchers we have on the phone, but that it sounds like an interesting research project once we obtain some of the permission slips.
You know what? So the original study was actually done in 1940. This was a relaunch of the study here in the 2000s. So not much had even changed. So 1940s was when Dr. Kenneth and Mamie did it. But then this was a kind of a relaunch to see, okay, let's see where we still stand. And this was actually done in 2000, in the 2000s. So anyway, yes, that was a very good question.
And I guess, I don't know, I guess it looks like there may be some people familiar with Robin DiAngelo's work on white privilege on the call. I know everyone is probably, thank you, Sarah. I saw your smile and nod, and your body language was affirmative. So thank you for that acknowledgement. Our children ultimately will develop this on their own in our absence. I have to ask a question though. Would you want your child to learn their sense of masculinity or femininity based on what they saw in social media or some other system? If we don't address identity, that's what we're subjecting them to. Mm-hmm. We have no choice but to address identity. We have to have those conversations intentionally. With or without you, they're going to develop an identity.
Yeah.
Depending on the identity, look at what occurs. Look at what happens when we don't address it, because one will be assigned to them in our absence. In the absence of our privilege as caregivers, one will be assigned to them by our universal culture, right? This identity formation starts as early as 2, 3, 4, 5. Knowing in what they are thinking about and having a plan to address it puts us at the cusp of addressing what lies beneath. As we talk about terms that are important for us to know in this journey, we're going to go into the next set of things, because our children face, in this society, in Western civilization, in the States, our children face headwinds. The headwinds for preventing identity formation are racism. Internalized racism is an individual's unconscious and conscious and unconscious acceptance of a racial hierarchy in which whites are consistently ranked above color.
That's what we just saw, in that Dahl test.
Yeah, that's internalized racism. Interpersonal racism, it's the next stage, occurs between individuals. Once private beliefs, what lies beneath, comes into interaction with others. The racism is now in the interpersonal realm between you and I. Examples include public expressions of racial prejudice, hate, bias, and bigotry among individuals. Institutionalized racism, institutional and cultural practices that perpetuate racial inequality. Benefits are structured to advantage powerful groups at the expense of others. Jim Crow laws, redlining practices, sometimes voter restriction laws. Structural racism, the ways in which the joint operation of institutions produce racialized outcomes. This speaks specifically to intent versus impact. Our intent was to get this, but because our research may not have been valid or correlated correctly, it produces a racialized outcome. Inequalities, unequal access to opportunities, and a differing policy that differs by race.
Yeah. So these are all of the reasons. So remember, our question was, why do we need to address and talk about race at an early age? These are all of the reasons why we need to do that. And I love this quote. Peggy McIntosh, I'm hopeful that you know her work. She has done some amazing work throughout the years, but she says, I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems conferring dominance on my group. I love this quote because sometimes it is harder to acknowledge racism in those invisible systems, right? Persons of color see it, they experience it, they live it out. Children living in transracial adoptive families, they're flowing in this daily, right? So we see it showing up in our practice sometimes. So we have to, as parents, be very intentional. We have to acknowledge it. We have to give it voice. And we must also have some intelligence. So doing our own work behind these dynamics of what's actually showing up, so then we can walk with our children and hold space in a safe manner for them in these real world dynamics. So blind spots. One of the things about blind spots, what's going on in this picture? Torrey, what do you see going on in this picture?
Well, what I see is I see a curvy road. And then as we're going down this road, right, the road disappears. And we don't know if it's a sinkhole. We don't know if the road just continues down the hill. Our assumption is that we don't have a problem and we go ahead. But this is how blind spots impact us as caregivers. So let's really talk about how we address those blind spots and learn to be effective allies for our children.
Yes, so virtual time. So what does it mean when someone says, I don't see color? What does that mean? Chat, put that in the box. Put that in the box. What does that mean? So when we think about colorblind parenting, it comes from a place of good intent, right? However, the impact can be egregious, right? So when we think to ourselves about the colorblind approach to parenting, what's being communicated when we say, I don't see color, I don't see you, right? If we believe that we are the same thing, then you dismiss what a Black child, what an Asian child, what an African child, or any child of color deals with as they navigate life. So going back to the fundamental desire, we all want to be seen. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Does anything I say matter? Right? Do I matter? It's a racial. I will just kind of bottom line it. When we have a colorblind ideology, it is a form of racism, right? It's a racial ideology that it just posits the best way to end discrimination is by treating individuals as equally as possible. And that doesn't take any regard to race, culture, ethnicity, right? So this mindset, it really acts as that cultural differences don't exist. And what we do know is that it's very important for you to what? To see me. So that's, just a little bit of, we want to always pepper in because we hear this a lot. We hear it a lot and it has really good intentions, but the impact lands very differently for those who are people of color. So let's talk about blind spots. Blind spots, they're pitfalls that can hinder us from becoming effective allies for our children, including I don't see color. So we wanted to just talk about a little bit of blind spots and what are some blind spots that may come up for you as you are navigating this journey, and they can hinder us from being effective allies for our children. So let's examine some of those.
I don't see color.
Mm.
They're being too sensitive. And Nikki, I'm having a trouble seeing a little bit of this slide.
That's okay. It says you have to be the bigger person. You have to be, sometimes we tell our children, you have to be the bigger person. Oh, that's not what so-and-so meant. That's not what so-and-so meant. They didn't mean that. You may have heard it wrong. You know, does it always have to be about race? Christ calls us to see our children, not their color. These are blind spots that can hinder us along the way as we're navigating these intersections. Oh, there's two sides to every story. You know, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Or no, we shouldn't talk about race. It's not polite. And then all lives matter.
All lives matter.
All lives matter.
It's again, let's say it's about impact. Our intentions are well-meaning. Of course, we know all lives matter. But if I have a level 5 fire at my house and your house is not on fire and the fire truck comes out, should the fire truck attend to the house that's not on fire? Or should it attend to the house that's like burning to the ground, desperately seeking relief?
Yeah, so when we think about these blind spots, we want to caution you to slow down, be mindful about when we may hear ourselves saying some of these things, hear other people saying some of these things, especially around our children, and understand how do we mitigate those? How do we walk through that? Another blind spot is the talk, right? So the talk, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the talk. We're going to show a video on what that looks like here momentarily, but blind spots, not understanding when we need to show up and actually be present for difficult conversations. As we unpack blind spots, the talk, it's a rites of passage in many homes of color, in particularly Black homes, right? Get home safely. That talk has been whispered and intentionally talked about and shouted now in this landscape by so many parents for decades, right? So this next video, we're going to show you the talk. This could be a blind spot. If we're not really conscious about what's going on in our society, we may miss it. So we're going to share with you just a little bit of information about the talk.
We actually have a line that we do at our house. We practice this thing. What is it?
I'm Ariel Sky Williams. I'm 8 years old. I'm unarmed and I have nothing that will hurt you.
It's just kind of a thing we practice at our house. There are great police officers out there. There's also some police officers who are not so good.
And my fear is that you run across one of those bad ones.
For some reason, people of color have always been a target by the police.
Before they became a policeman, they were a person. And that person took all their ideas and all their thoughts and all their prejudice into their job.
Why would a police officer assume that you did something bad? Maybe because of my skin color.
I remember being put in handcuffs for something that had nothing to do with me. I was literally walking in the mall. Cops slammed me on the ground, busted my lip, chipped my tooth. That actually made me really mad.
How about the time they pulled us over with me in the car and arrested me and left all of you guys sitting in the car and nobody knew how to drive on the side of the road because the bumper on the car was kind of hanging off?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we live in Puyallup. There's people that don't even have a bumper on their car.
My rear brake light wasn't working. And I got to my destination and they were working.
I was about your age, actually. They grabbed me.
Why?
I didn't know at the time. They just grabbed me. They threw me onto the police car.
I got tased that time. That time they tased me because they said I wasn't complying.
Ariel, are you okay?
What's wrong, baby? okay, I'm alive, all right? Every day I get to see you, I get to do this, right? All right, come on, let's calm down, let's finish this, all right? Good? Hey, you making me cry.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The talk. Some of you may have heard it, may have seen others maybe being introduced for the first time. But this is a very common talk. We've had the same talk with our children. It really addresses how we're constantly building identity. Some portions of identity are external, such as this one. Others are internal. As we're thinking about what lies beneath, and we think about identity as a building, what are the infrastructural components of identity? Well, you guys may have heard of MEP before, mechanical engineering and plumbing. If you're in any building or any home, any organization with four walls, what lies beneath becomes very, very important. I can imagine in New York where everything tends to go up more than it goes out. That is a challenge about what lies beneath, and making sure that your pipes, your plumbing, your electrical, your engineering, all of that is in place well before you start pouring any other foundational elements, such as a foundation to build up as we grow up. And this is the same for a child. We must lay a strong foundation for identity, intentionally solid support that addresses all phases of what lies beneath a child's identity, not just what we see and what they show us, but the messaging in their minds and the messaging in their hearts.
Yeah. So why talk about race and ethnicity? I think we've kind of laid a foundation, but we're going to go a little bit deeper, right? So let's talk about the experiences of transracial adoptees and what our children internalize.
Nikki, could I pause? Is everyone still doing okay? All right. If you are, give us a thumbs up.
Yeah, occasionally we like to check in because we know this can be a little heavy at times.
Thank you for sharing your comments about the video as well.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for participating in our global discussion. We're all being changed by this.
Mm-hmm.
Nikki, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Torrey. So the experiences of transracial adoptees, hopefully we've laid the foundation as to why it's necessary to address identity. However, no one can speak more clearly and succinctly about the adoptive journey other than adoptees. As clinicians, as advocates, and even as adoptive parents in this space, we always want to acknowledge their voice and their lived experiences. So we show up on behalf of them based upon some of the things that we see as we listen to them, as we walk alongside them in our practice and our professional work. We want to just share a few things that we've heard in the experiences that transracial adoptees may go through. So stepping out the door, it's a different experience, mentally and emotionally preparing to be out in public with a family who does not look like you. Mentally and emotionally, kiddos have to prepare for that. Anxiety may also be tied to this racial awareness, triggering body memory related to post-trauma. One of the things I know to be true is, especially in this climate, when we think about what's going on, it's not uncommon for Asian adoptees, teens, some of the teens that I've heard from, they're very aware of what's going on, and some of them don't even want to go to school. They don't want to leave their house. They don't feel protected in this world, and sometimes not even in their own homes. Yeah, because what's happening in society is not being talked about. So that anxiety is real as you think about just doing some of the everyday tasks of what we have to do. I've also heard it's one thing to be the parent of a child of color, but it's another thing to be the child of color. All right. Microaggressions, we're going to talk about that momentarily. Microaggressions are real, right? And they're not always appropriated by complete strangers. Microaggressions show up at our dinner table with grandpa, grandma, auntie, uncle, friends. So microaggressions, navigating this, these are experiences, because microaggressions are like a million tiny paper cuts. And as we know, one paper cut, okay, we nick it, put a Band-Aid on, some Neosporin, we're good. But a million tiny paper cuts, we could possibly breathe to death. It hurts it hurts, it's painful. And then also just the racialized experiences can be traumatic and unpredictable. These are some of the experiences of our children. These are some of the experiences. I want to share another video. We love videos, as I said, another experience of our children. If you're familiar with This Is Us, this is a clip that we see this a lot, and it's important to make sure that we're addressing this right here. So I'm going to start the clip and we'll come back and process.
I know. So I was hoping you and Kev would talk, you know, clear the air. I'm not taking any sides. I know I live in LA with him, but I am totally Switzerland on this one. Randall, are we good? I mean, I've been texting and reaching out and I haven't heard anything back really. And I'm just so worried about you and Beth and the girls, you know, with everything that's going on in the news. I'm so overwhelmed by it. I can't even imagine what you guys are all going through. So I'm so sorry.
Sorry about what? Specifically, what are you apologizing for?
I'm sorry about what's going on in the country and the protests.
Okay, but you've never apologized before. And this isn't the first Black person to be killed on camera.
No, it's not. None of this feels different.
It's not for me, Kate. It's never been different for me. We grew up in the same house. Things like this have been happening to Black people for years, and we've never talked about it. Not once. Not once in 40 years.
I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
So growing up, I just had to keep so many things to myself because I didn't want to make you guys feel bad. I didn't want you to have to worry about saying the wrong thing.
Well, you're right. I mean, we never talked about it as kids. And I think mom and dad did the best they could, I guess, but I didn't get involved. I didn't even.
See, I hate this, Kate. I hate seeing you upset. And normally I would hug you and I would tell you that you did all the right things. I would try to make it all okay for you. But if I did that, Kate, if I made things better for you, then where does that leave me? I'm sorry, but I can't do that. That has been my pattern all my life. And honestly, Kate, it is exhausting. I'm exhausted. And all I want to do right now is go home and be with my wife and my girls.
Okay. I love you.
I love you too.
Mm-hmm.
Happy birthday, sis.
Happy birthday.
So Randall, we don't watch this show, but I always get texts from colleagues and friends saying, are you watching This Is Us? You have to see this clip. You have to. They're talking about transracial adoption and the perspective of Randall. And oh my gosh, my eyes are opened. And so we had to kind of go dig, and we looked at this and we said, oh, wow. So going back to what are the experiences of transracial adoptees, for those of you who are not familiar with This Is Us as much as I can speak to this. Randall is in a transracial adoptive family. They all have the same birth dates, his sister, his brother, and then Randall. The sister and brother, I believe, are biological siblings, but Randall was adopted, but he was in I think the hospital the same day. And so that's how they all have the same birthdays. And so you see them as siblings entering into a hard conversation, experiences that we often hear from transracial adoptees. We don't talk about race in my home. I don't feel seen, right? So we oftentimes we hear from parents and caregivers, well, my kids don't bring it up, so I don't know that I need to. Just because they don't bring the conversation to you does not mean that they are not thinking about it, right? And our experience shows us that as young as 3 years old, they will tee up conversations. They will tee up conversations as we do our work because they have that felt safety, right, in the practice room. And so it's hard to really understand that if they're not talking about it, it must not be on their mind, but they're absolutely, it is on their mind. So our job is to shepherd what that space looks like. And even if we think they're not thinking about it, absolutely being able to lean into those conversations. So see me. That's what Randall is saying.
Microaggressions. Secono, thank you guys. I want to acknowledge that I saw a lot of ICUs, I saw a lot of Seconos. So thank you for participating in our process of collective sight. Microaggressions, intent versus impact. Yes, someone alluded to it earlier in the chat box that this looks like a microaggression. Well, it is.
Oh, yeah.
Well, now we're going to explore microaggressions just a little bit more because I think maybe in the last 5 years, we've heard the term pop up more and more settings, right? But who's heard of the term microaggression? Okay, good. A lot of us are familiar where they're brief and commonplace daily verbal or behavioral indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults that potentially have a harmful or unpleasant psychological impact on a targeted person or group.
Yeah. So we're going to run you through some examples of, again, we're talking about what our children are experiencing. If we are a transracial adopted family system, foster care system, these are some of the things our children are walking in. So microaggressions, here's a few of them. What are you? Human? Being biracial doesn't make me a what? That happens a lot. We can personally attest to this one. That happens a lot. What are you? The next slide says, can you see as much as white people? You know, because of your eyes. You're really pretty for a dark-skinned girl. So there's that caveat there, right? A microaggression. Are you even legal? Microaggression.
These are all very they're examples of microaggressions, and of course we know that within the microaggression family there are micro invalidations, micro insults, and micro assaults. Right? I'll tell you a story about our children when we first got into an adoptive placement, and where we live local is a pretty integrated area. But we went to our favorite donut shop that we go to. I was the carpool dad. Yeah. I guess I still am the carpool dad. We used to carpool with our neighbors and take turns taking our children to school. But from time to time, we'll go to the donut shop in the morning as a treat. It's not a standard because we can't send our kids on a sugar high to school because that's not necessarily the best strategy for us. But one day in this donut shop, the lady behind the counter asked us, she looked at me. There was a crowd of people behind, a crowd of people at the other counter. She said, wow, your children are so beautiful. What do they mix with? At that very moment, my daughter looked at me in sheer fear. And she was just like studying me and wondering how I was going to respond. My son sort of looked down, but my response was, because I was prepared. They're mixed with my hugs and mommy's kisses. And And there was a way to diffuse the moment. My daughter immediately smiled. My son looked up, and the lady behind the counter just smiled, right? Microaggressions are deadly because they're a death that's torturous. We never know which cut is going to kill you. Is it cut 1 or is it cut 1,000? But they all hurt, right? I think we have some questions that we
can take. We'll try to be some room to take those towards the end, or
okay. Yes. If you would, Susan and Kay, I see your hands are raised. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge that I saw you. And at the end, please come back and make sure that you ask whatever question that you have right now. We would love to be able to entertain it. How are we living this out in our mission statement?
Parental task.
It's not what we say, but it's what we do. What lies beneath the behavior of microaggressions? How are we being intentional as caregivers and parents at these important intersections to address what lies beneath?
So we are here, parental task. Why dialogue about race and adoption? Simply this: children are concrete thinkers. In transracial adoptions, children's adoption is seen through the lens of race because that is how they are questioned. That's how they show up in the family. This creates a complex intersection of two complex identities that children and even some adults cannot separate. So this is why we talk about the intersectionality of race and adoption and how we navigate this and how we shepherd this well, and knowing that it's okay if we mess up. We will not get it right every single time, but the intentionality in bringing this to the conscious and being able to understand and do some of our own work. So when we show up, we hold space in a way that's safe. That is our goal. And if we do that, that's a win. That's a check. So here's what we do. Well, first, I love this quote because this goes straight into what we're getting ready to talk about, all the parental tasks, but not to mention race or the impacts of racism or expose me to anyone who is of my bones is to do violence against the essence of who I am. And now we've laid the foundation that silence is agreement with the status quo, right?
Silence. Our silence in particular.
Our silence as caregivers.
Says it's okay. And it is internalized by our children, and the children that we care for is shame. Silence can be deadly for them. It is crucial that we remember that silence is agreement with the status quo, not addressing injustices or being indifferent, not having some messaging for our children can be internalized by our children that we agree with the statement and processed by them by shame. Let's learn how to talk about it. We see marginalized groups being mistreated every single day. We must speak up. Your voice is very powerful. We want to be influencers. There's a word going around in our community of the healing profession, being an ally. Allyship must be earned continually, over and over, every single day.
Okay, so let's talk about the needs. The needs of our children. Here's what they need. They need to live in an environment that provides the child with positive experiences with their culture. They need to have ongoing relationships with same race and peer models. That's a need. They need to live in an environment that provides the child with positive racial and ethnic pride, coping, problem solving, and survival skills. They also need to have parents who can help the child acquire experiences and information that develops positive cultural identity. They also need to have parents who can recognize and empathize with the child's feelings of racial, cultural, and family of origin differences from the transracial family system. They need to have parents who can empathize and understand the child's experience of living in a race-conscious society. And they also need to have parents who are knowledgeable of their child's dietary, skin, hair, and healthcare needs. Full integration. And again, I want to encourage you, it seems like a mammoth of a task, and that feels heavy right there. I get that. We get that. And so we don't want you to feel like I have to be, this is such a big weight, and I have to know everything in order to do this. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that if we're conscious about the needs and then we take the baby steps, that's the win. That's the one. So we want to encourage you to take the baby steps. Who you eat with, who's at your dinner table, like those actionable, tangible steps. Where do
you worship?
Yeah. Who do you love? Who do you love?
Right. Who shares your refrigerator?
Yeah.
Who's playing in your backyard? Who's swimming in your pool? Who's sitting around the fire pit in the backyard sharing a Corona on ice with salt?
And how are you, so basically, how are you walking this out with your family mission statement? So we can always say, this is what we believe, but our behaviors are over here. And if they don't align, then there's some incongruence. So we want to make sure that who we say we are is aligning with our actions. So we talked about some of those needs. Here's how you address identity, support systems. You want to be conscious about that. Helping our children cope, those survival skills, strategies for confronting or challenging prejudice. We want to have some, we always encourage our clients. It's okay to have some strategies and some thoughts and some language in place that's rehearsed, because what we do know is we're going to get some of these questions. Microaggressions are going to happen. So when they happen, are we ready to have a turnkey statement that we feel comfortable, we practice, and we can kind of give voice to that if it makes us feel uncomfortable, and surely if it makes our children feel uncomfortable. So we need to have those strategies in place. And then developing positive identity and self-esteem to counteract inferiority complexes. So that comes with intentional dialogue. That comes with us having some reading and knowledge about maybe the culture, the ethnicity of our child, and understanding how we put these, sprinkle and pepper these little practices or traditions into our families. So that's overall how we address it. And now we're going to take a deeper dive into some tactics. And I know we have about 10 more minutes, Torrey. So yes, we want to be a good steward of time. So see me. And guess what? We've laid the foundations. I'm ready to grow. So let's kind of get into what are some of the tactical things that we can absolutely do to say, I see you. I see you. I see you, baby. So let's go into the what's real quick. We want to create intentional space.
And Nikki, before we go there, I want to say this. As we signed up for this journey, and all of us signed up, if you're on the call, you've signed up to participate in this journey. No one told us, we didn't read it anywhere, that there would be a lot of detours, a lot of intersections, a lot of transitions from which we would have to investigate what lied beneath. So we're giving strategies about what we can do. We can address the questions of what does diversity look like?
So educate.
What does it mean to us? How do our children experience diversity in terms of education, educators, administrators, therapists, doctors, dentists, places of worship, extended family? Integration of trauma-informed care and transracial issues are critical. Remembering that diversity is not perceived the same way as what your children have internalized.
We also want to recognize how silent forms of racism and discrimination can become more visible within our family. So now that we have some visual, we've shared some visual, some videos, and we've shared some terminology. Now we're a little bit more sensitive to, this may be happening. So we want to be able to recognize that. We also want to be able to acknowledge and then become aware of privileged status in relation to people of color, right? Our privilege. Right? We may be protecting our kiddos because they fall underneath the umbrella of our privilege when they're young, but as they get older, our privilege may not always be there to cover them. So we want to be able to acknowledge that and prepare them for that. We want to realize that adopting across racial line does not co-opt race. And we want to analyze our circle, literally sit and think about who is in my circle and how integrated am I within my community of color. Right. The individuals that look like my children.
Right. What is the social justice agenda for our family? Is it zero tolerance? Because protecting our children is never about keeping them necessarily in a bubble. It's about preparing them for what they do outside of our privilege. Are we developing muscles? Big muscles. I like weights, but are we developing big emotional and cognitive muscles for them to adapt and advocate for themselves? do we have our parenting plan in place in terms of helping them develop a racial identity? Diversity. Are we talking about diversity? Are we talking about equity? Do we understand what social justice is?
What it looks like. Yeah. So now we're going to talk about the when and how. So if you have preschoolers, what we're going to suggest, be honest. Be honest with them, embrace curiosity, broaden choices, foster pride, lead by example. So what that looks like, we don't want to encourage our children not to see color or tell them that we're all the same, right? We want to discuss differences openly. We want to acknowledge the beauty of our differences. We want to choose picture books and toys and games and videos that feature a broad perspective of characters and colors and individuals, right? So we want to be thoughtful about how we embrace that curiosity. If you are in elementary and if you are parenting an elementary or a preteen, now this is where they're in a different developmental lifespan, so you're modeling it. So we're not just saying, okay, I need you to treat everyone with respect. We're showing them what that looks like in the way that we model things. We're acknowledging differences ourselves. We're challenging intolerance. You know, we want to seize teachable moments when there's teachable moments, whether that's a clip that just came up in a show and being able to say, oh, let's stop and process that. Let's talk about that. We want to emphasize the positive things, right? Those are the things we want to do in those preteen years. In the teenage years, now this is when they are developmentally, they're aware. So they have friends, they hear friends' parents talking, they're out into the world a little bit, so they understand what's going on. We want to keep talking, we want to stay involved. Again, living congruently, making sure that they see diversity in our worlds, broadening opportunities. And at this stage, we see a lot of times we have teenagers who this past couple of years that want to be involved in activism, right? So encouraging that from a safe place. Those are some of the things that we can do as parents. These are additional considerations as well. Just making sure, again, words, language, and value statements, that we have those formulated and we can understand what that looks like. And professionals who are adoption competent therapists, they can help you with this if you get overwhelmed with what this looks like for me. We want to give them cultural currency and exposure and language to their heritage and adoption mentors, and also social justice and advocacy, thinking through, do you have a social justice plan for your family?
Right. Our first task as parents or caregivers, acknowledge the existence of prejudice, racism, and discrimination.
So now we're doing a recap. We're recapping everything we've said. We've got to first acknowledge it.
Explaining why the child's minority group is mistreated. Mm-hmm. This is doing our own research to address the inaccuracies of sometimes his story.
Yeah. We're providing a child with a repertoire of responses to racial discrimination, developmentally appropriate, and we are not leaving them to hang out there by themselves. We're walking along with them every step of the way with our style and how we actually confront that, what that looks like. We're providing the child role models and positive contact with their minority community. So that means we might have to drive across town, or that means we have to get on the yellow pages. I'm saying yellow pages, I dated myself. Pick up our phones and start Googling and finding that little softball team that may be a little bit more diverse if we don't live in those areas.
All right. Preparing the child for discrimination, right? Whether that's in school when we're not around, whether that's sporting events, church events, etc. Teaching the child the difference between responsibility to and for their minority group. There is a difference.
Mm-hmm. And this is the big one.
Advocating on behalf of your child's positive identity. Teaching your child all the richness of the heritage of their identity. Exploring with them books, narrative stories. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so much, we love to talk about this. There's so much that we can say, but we just wanted to lay the foundation for seeing me. I see you. For those who want to continue the conversation, I will just share, we have a resource that we developed. We've shared a lot of resources on the slide. please, and I will come back and I will put all of this in the portal, but we have shared a lot of resources. Please use those resources. We have a special gift free to you today. We have, for those who wanted to continue the conversation, to understand the more, a free guide that is chock full of more of the deep dive. So some of those tasks that we talked about, there's bullet points for how we walk along each child in each developmental stage. So I'm going to ask you right now, if you pull out your phone, I've been told that literally if you have a QRC code, or if you just take a picture, if you have an iPhone, you can put that up to the screen and it'll take you to a special page that we created for you today that will take you to some of the free guide or some of the free resources that we just talked about and how you can opt into that. So I'm hoping it works. I was told it works, but with these little squiggly lines across this presentation, I'm hoping it still is captured, but if not, I will put it in the chat. It just shares how you walk alongside children from a transracial adoptive perspective. And we are so thrilled to be able to give that to you.
And Pat, before we close, do we have 2 minutes?
You don't even have an iPhone.
Oh,
you should actually still be able to do it with any phone. So if you have a QR code, it should scan. I'm hoping it did. It scan for you, Mr. Pat?
Yes, it did.
Okay, good. Well, good. All right, Mr. Pat, do we have a few minutes for questions?
And I'm going to ask Miss Claudia, and I believe we do.
I'm going to say yes, we should be good.
Okay. Let me end with this quote, and then I'm going to turn it over to the questions. I think it's important to read this. I think it really gives a nice anchor to what we've talked about. In adoptive parents, this is a quote that I love. Adoptive parents often say, it's by an adult adoptee, I love her like my own. Perhaps you do, but this is not about you, your love, or your needs. This is about us. You must celebrate what about us differs from you and acknowledge that we are not of you. We are of others. You must understand and respect our primal wound, the one your love can't cure. Good parenting requires we encourage our children to be themselves and speak the truth. It demands we celebrate their differences and give them agency over their lives. Good parenting means moving our egos out of the way. It means we respect our children for the autonomous human beings that they are. Adoptees require and deserve nothing less. So do not fear or grief or demand we mask our pain under coats of gratitude. Trust that we can love you both. Allow us space to be and to find ourselves. So with that being said, thank you so much. And we will absolutely open it up for questions.
Hey.
Okay.
And, go ahead and answer some of the questions that might have been in the chat room if you like.
Sure. There was a question, I think, Robin, I remember seeing a question that you had earlier. I'm going to try to go back and find it.
And Robin, if you want to make it easier by just taking yourself off mute and ask, and go ahead.
There was a term, and I'm forgetting what it was. There was a term, something of
co-opt.
Co-opt. What can you help me understand that term?
Nikki, do you want to take it? Do you want to explain it? This co-opting in terms of race, adopting transracially.
You can handle that one, sweetie.
All right. So what that means is because you have adopted or caregiving transracially, it doesn't naturally co-opt to you as being anti-racist. It means there may still be work to do. You believe it or not, what we found in our experience as clinicians and in training and in the research is that you can actually care for a child that does not look like you and still have things below the surface that are tied and anchored in racist ideology. So just because you adopt or provide caregiving, it doesn't mean that you automatically get a pass on addressing those biases and doing bias investigation and taking inventory of what lies beneath.
Yeah, so adopting an idea or a policy. So we adopt our own idea or policy based upon what we believe. So that kind of goes with deconstructing some of our own personal bias and debunking some of those myths. I hope that answered your question. Any other questions?
You guys prefer that people ask questions or that we go through the chat room?
I think whatever your best practice is, if you want to go through the chat room, we can do that. We will be hanging out in there today. So we'll make our presence known. And for anyone who has actually been a part of this and they want to chat with us, we're so happy to spend some time with them virtually.
And I think Mara made a great suggestion about reading Robin DiAngelo's work regarding white fragility. I think that's a baseline of getting everyone started about having this discussion in a very informed perspective. In the absence of somebody being prepared to share their journey, I'll tell you a story as much as I can tell you. We service families that are on a vast spectrum socioeconomically, from being what somebody would classify as impoverished to being very affluent. And we're in Texas. We're in a very conservative state. I'll tell you that part of that journey is that our oftentimes the caregivers that come to us for support are Anglo or Caucasian, and they're facing the same questions that you're asking, and particularly as it relates to affluency, right? If I have removed the child out of a situation or put this out in a situation of affluency and socioeconomic issues are not a concern because we're multimillionaires or et cetera, what the child doesn't have any problem. Well, that's absolutely inaccurate, because we must intentionally and we encourage parents to step into the child's shoes at their private school and look around in their classroom and see if there's anybody that talks like them, looks like them, see what messages are being stated inside the classroom, who they're playing with at recess, who they get to eat lunch with, who wants to eat lunch with them. Are they being invited to birthday parties? Are they being excluded? What is the child's perspective in terms of their sports teams outside of school? Are we creating a integrative approach to experience? Meaning, are you willing to drive on the north, south, east, west side so that your child, so that you can be the only person that looks like you in the crowd or audience, and your child can feel some sense of normalcy? Those are questions that we encourage parents to investigate. So your question was a great question, a great statement as well. And I'll tell you that we are addressing that. Parents, we're very encouraged because parents are addressing that as well, and they're very open.
In some of their work.
And our default is we want to put our children in the best situation by providing the best set of circumstances, regardless of what our socioeconomic status is. That is our default desire. So great question.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to turn it back over to Pat and his team, and we want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for allowing us to spend these moments with you, and we will make ourselves available, and you can reach out to us anytime if there's some additional questions.